Hey everybody, this is Sheets, and before we get into why I have this spreadsheet up, I want to start by posing a very classic, mind-bending trivia question, which has been around for a long, long time, and you'll forgive me if everybody has heard it already. But it's been often referred to as the let's make a deal question. Before that, I think it was the prisoner's envelopes question or whatever. And it will become apparent why we're doing this somewhat down the road. The way it works is it's pretty simple, and yet so many people just can't seem to get it for some reason. The scenario is you're given a choice between three doors, three curtains, three windows, three boxes, whatever. You're given a choice of three doors, one of which has $1 million behind it, and the other two have nothing. You're offered this by Monty Hall or the host or whomever to make your choice. Then you pick one, and then the host, who knows what door the $1 million is behind, okay, he then eliminates one of the remaining two doors from contention. He will show you one of the doors that has nothing. He will tell you one of the doors that has the goat or the pile of beans or whatever, and tell you that that door is not the one with the $1 million. And then what he will do is he will offer you the opportunity to switch from the door you have chosen to the one remaining door left. So again, what you have is three doors. One of them has $1 million, the other two have zero. And you pick one, and then the host, who knows which door is behind, will eliminate one of the remaining doors as being one of them that has nothing, and give you the opportunity to switch to the one remaining door. And the question is simply, should you switch? Should you stay the same? Or does it not matter at all? So for those of you that haven't heard this before, I want you to just think for just 2 seconds about your answer. And then we'll go over the answer. Because this question, for a lot of reasons, has stumped lots of people for no reason. And we will bring this back to poker in a few minutes. Well, for those of you that selected the choice, well, obviously it doesn't matter. I mean, what difference does it make? Your odds are still 1/3 of having it right. It doesn't matter whether the guy eliminated one or not. You're 100% dead wrong. Okay? It is correct to switch by about a 2-to-1 margin. Now, for whatever reason, it's taken people light years of explanation to understand this. I mean, there actually, if you Google this problem, just like the Monty Hall's problem, you'll find probably like hundreds and hundreds of websites dedicated to it, really for no reason. Okay? The only reason people get it wrong is because they're just acting intuitively without just thinking for a second about the value of information. But let me just give you two ways to think about why switching is right. I'm not going to get into all the Bayesian analysis or anything like that, but let me just try to make some sense of it. The first way to do it is just by brute force, okay? I mean, let's just, remember there are only three options. The doors, the millions behind door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3. Let's say that you've picked door number 1 as your initial, selection, okay? And he's eliminated one of them, and you're one of the remaining two, and you're left with your choice. Well, let's just do the brute force math and just prove, first of all, brutally why you have to switch. Well, if the million was in fact behind door number 1, which happens 1/3 of the time, then obviously switching would be bad, right? If you eliminated one of the other two and you switched from the winner, that'd be bad. And that's going to happen 1/3 of the time. Let's say, though, the $1 million was behind door number 2. Well, then he would have eliminated door number 3, and it would have been correct for you to switch. And that occurs 1/3 of the time. And also, let's say the million was behind door number 3. well, he would eliminate door number 2, and obviously it would be correct for you to switch. So, and that happens a third of the time. So 2/3 of the time, it is going to be correct to switch, and 1/3 of the time, it's going to be correct to stay the same. Okay, which makes 2-1 in your favor to switch. And if you don't like that explanation, I'll give you another one. Before you have any information at all, okay, given to you by the host about what's going on in the other two doors, you know that when you pick door number 1, you have a 1/3 chance of being correct, right? So if you have a 1/3 chance of being correct, then obviously the other 2 doors combined have a 2/3 chance of being correct, right? Like if your one door is a 1/3 chance of being correct, then the 2 doors that you haven't picked combined have a 2/3 chance of being correct. Now, if the host eliminates one of those doors from contention, then basically that other remaining door has absorbed all of the 2/3 probability of that, that of what you have not picked. Like your one door still has a 1/3 chance of being correct. That doesn't change. But the 2/3 chance that the other doors are correct have now been completely swallowed up by the one remaining door after Monty has, thrown one of the bad ones away. So no matter how you analyze, either by brute force or just deductively, I mean, it's very clear that switching is correct. Now, I will tell you that if you have to stop the recording and go back, which is a lot of you are doing right now, some of you are Googling the Monty Hall problem also, don't be too upset with yourself, because this problem, when it was first published about 50 years ago, well, this version of the problem, I mean, this is a very classic game theory problem. Not even a game theory problem, very classic probability problem. When it was first published, apparently the magazine that published it was faced with thousands of letters from PhDs and geniuses who were trying to explain why the answer was incorrect. That all these people were claiming that no, it doesn't make a difference. But you have a 1/3 chance of being correct regardless of what gets eliminated from contention. You still have a 1/3 chance of being correct. What difference does it make whether you switch or not? It turns out the original question, the way it was posed in the magazine, was somewhat ambiguous about whether the host actually knew where the $1 million was. So that's probably what led to some confusion. But even when it was clarified in the way that I clarified it, still a good percent of the people get that wrong. Okay? And if you haven't heard the question, you got it wrong too, before you heard the explanation, then, you're not alone. And for those of you that still think that answer is wrong after hearing the explanation, that's not surprising either, because it kind of flies in the face of what you've been taught, about what you intuitively believe, that probabilities don't change. You have a 1/3 chance of being right, and that's it. But what you're missing, and what's important, is that while it is true that 1/3 of the time you're going to be right, the injection of that new information is critical to the result of that problem. Okay? And the reason I bring this problem up is because we play poker, and poker is a game of imperfect information. Okay? And the more information that you can gather, the more you're going to be able to make deductions about what you're supposed to do. We're going to go over and we're going to try and not get too math-oriented about this, although we're going to be forced to. But we're going to try to make use of kind of a derivation of this let's make a deal problem as it applies to poker. And I will tell you that one of the ways that you could prove this let's make a deal problem is using Bayes' theorem, which we are going to get into. Let's pull this spreadsheet back up again. Let's reduce this to, a real world situation. You're sitting here, you show up at a table, and your first time sitting at the table, you have 4,000 in chips, your reshove amount. You know, it's 1, 2 and a quarter, the ante, 1, 2 and a quarter levels. And it gets folded to some guy on the button, and he raises to say 600. And you have some hand, I don't know, like 6-7 suited or something. And you're considering shoving all in. And what you do know is that you've done some work on this type of stuff. And if you can make certain assumptions about that button raiser, then you're going to be able to determine whether shoving is correct, right? I mean, it all depends on what you think of this guy's range and what you think of his calling range. That will determine whether you can raise to 6-7. Like, for example, if he's the type of guy, your typical tight guy who's going to open, I don't know, maybe 20% of the hands and call your shove with about 10% of the hands. So let's say that in top 10% of the hands, let's say you got the 6-7 suited, 33.59%. Actually, let's give him a little worse. Let's give him 6-7 offsuit. Okay, you got 30.122%. So put that in here. 30.122%. Okay. So if you know that if you're your typical tight guy here, you really can't make this shove. Now, on the other hand, let's say that he's one of these guys that's going to be opening top 40%. You know, he's an aggressive player. He's aggro, and obviously, if he's going to raise 40, he's going to be one of those guys going to call a little lighter too. And if he's going to open with the top 40% of the hands and call shove with 15, we have to change this to 15%. Got 31.73. Then you're going to have a plus 217. So let's put that off to the side here. Plus 217. So let's put it here. 217 if aggro. And then we're going to put, let's go, what was that before? 20, 10. What was it, 30.122? Minus 153 if tight. All right. Now, let's say that you have certain, I don't want to say assumptions yet, but let's say you sit at this table and you sit here and you've never seen him play before, and you're on the button and the guy raises. Okay? What does that do for you? If you knew he was aggressive, you know, you've never seen him before. If you knew he was aggro, you knew that he can shove. You can shove, right? And if you knew that he was tight, then you know that you can fold. So let's say that you have some assumptions. You can make some assumptions about how many people are aggressive or how many people are tight and what that word means to you. Okay? Let's pause for just a second. Sorry about that. We'll get back to all this in a second. Okay? Well, we'll fill all this in a minute. Well, it's all filled in, but I'll tell you what all this means in a minute. Let's just say that, I don't know, you can assume, say, 20% of the people are aggressive. Okay? And about 80% of the people are tight. Now, again, the problem with this whole discussion is that there's always blends between aggro and tight. You know what I mean? Like, you're not either aggressive or tight. You know, there's certain levels of it. But for the purposes of discussion, let's just say that about 20% of the people are aggressive and 80% are tight. And let's say that we know that if he's an aggressive, he's going to open with the top, well, I don't know, let's say again, instead of top 50, top 40% of the hands. Okay? Well, let's just to prove my point. Let's do it. Top 40% of the hand. And going to call with the top 15%. And if he's tight, he's going to open top 20 and call top 10. Well, the question is, if he has raised, okay? Remember, we're trying to figure out whether we're going to shove or not. If he has in fact raised, what are the chances he is aggressive versus what are the chances he is tight? And I want you to think about the Monty Hall problem intuitively for just a minute here. Okay? We know going in that 20% of the people are aggressive and 80% of them are tight. Now you sit here and if he's aggressive, he's going to open top 40. If he's going to tight, he's going to open top 20. And you sit down and you are armed with only the information that this guy has raised. Okay? Before he's raised, you don't know anything about him. Okay? That's like you picked your door. Okay? Now you've sat down and you have a little bit of information that he's raised. What are the chances now that he's aggressive? For those of you that said, well, you don't know. Maybe he just has a hand. Maybe he's tight. You just don't know. Just based on the one raise, how can you know? Well, again, think of it in terms of information. When you go into any situation at all with no information, you can only guess randomly, pretty much, right? You go into that Monty Hall problem with only the knowledge that it's behind one of those doors. The best you're going to do is 1/3. But with each bit of information that you're given, the chances that you could be more intelligent about your choice has to improve. Okay? Think about that logically. If you are making a decision with no information, all right, if the information that you gather affects what you've originally presumed, then that information has to help you in some way. Now, if you think about it, the fact that somebody is raising, it means that ever more slightly, that person is going to be more aggressive than a tight player. Doesn't that make sense, even intuitively? That if a tight player is going to open less, then if a person raised, then they are going to be slightly more, they're going to be more likely to be an aggressive player than a tight player. But the question is how much, okay? The question is how much. For those of you that said the chance that he's aggressive, if he's raised, is 20%, you're wrong. And now is where we have to get into this Bayes' theorem, okay? Bayes' theorem is a very simple, although difficult, probability lesson, okay? Which allows you to, if you have certain assumptions like 80% of the people are tight, 20% are aggressive. If in fact he's aggressive, he's going to open with top 40. If in fact he's tight, he's going to open top 20. You can use that information to make some deductions about the nature of this person, about your original assumption. Now, these Bayes' theorem problems usually take the form of, well, not usually, but you often see them if you do, a Google search for Bayes' theorem. You'll see your typical problem dealing with false positives when you're dealing with like AIDS tests or paternity tests or things like that, or when you're dealing with issues where you have machines that spew out defective products and the company knows in advance what the probability is that each machine is going to spit out a defective product, okay? And to be able to figure out if a product is defective, what machine it came from. And these Bayes formula questions usually take this form, but you could also apply these to poker as well. Anytime you can have some kind of accurate assumption, upon which all this is based, obviously, then you have to be able to improve. Now, this is kind of the formula here, and I put it up here. What this means is the probability of A given B, okay? Remember, we know that he's open for a raise. We're trying to figure out if the guy's aggressive, given that he's open for a raise. So the probability that he's aggressive, the slash means given the fact that he's open for a raise, is going to be, and this is, you can just look up Bayes' formula, Bayes' theorem for this, is the probability of the fact that he would open for a raise if he is aggressive, which we know, right? He would open 40% of the time. That's multiplied by the probability that he is in fact aggressive, and we know that, 20%. And divide that whole thing by the probability that he again, B given A, opens for a raise given that he's aggressive, 40%, times again the probability that he's aggressive, 20%. And added to that in the denominator is the probability that he's opening for a raise if he was not aggressive, meaning that if he were tight, 20% of the time, times the probability that he is not aggressive. That's what A to root C means. It's actually the complement of A, which means not A. So you multiply that by the probability that he is actually tight, which is 20%. So to use this formula, you're going to be able to make some deductions of whether the guy is in fact aggressive. Like, if we know that going in that he's, without having any information, that there's a 20% chance he's aggressive, and if all we know that he's raised, okay, all we know is that he is raised, we can already increase the likelihood that he is aggressive from 20% to 33%, just because he is raised. And if you think about that, that really affects your ability to determine whether this type of thing is good, Because if you think about it, if, let's say, 33% of the time, so let's say equals G16 times, whatever that's L32, right? So you get plus 72 and then equals this times, chance he's tight. So right now, just by adding those two, that bit of information, you can figure out the net effectiveness of making this shove with the 6-7 off is negative 29 chips. Okay, because again, 2/3 of the time you're gonna win 217, and you're gonna be at 217 of EV, and 1/3 of the time, right here, you're gonna lose 102. So, you're gonna lose what your net is, right? Well, actually, we have 158. That doesn't make a difference, really. I mean, you can put in 158. So, yeah, so you have negative 33, which is a lot better than if you just had a 20% chance that he was aggressive. Now, let's say that instead of, and again, you've improved your information just from that one action of watching him raise. Now, let's say that, I don't know, instead of picking up 6-7, the first hand, let's say you start under the gun, right? Let's say you start under the gun and you see some guy, the first hand, raise. And then you get in the big blind and you see second hand he raised. Now, instead of you only have the information that he's opening once for a raise, now you have the information that he's opening twice for a raise. If you have the information he's opening twice in a row for a raise, then his chances of being aggressive have rocketed from 20% up to 50%. Okay? And that's huge, right? Because now, just from you observing those two hands, not even the two hands, you get to shove on that second hand, right? Just from really observing the one hand and seeing that he's raised again, you can make this play with a lot more confidence, because now we could multiply that by L33 instead of L32. L36. So now we have a 30 chip edge, okay? And this was from observing a guy raise once and watching him raise again. You can make these types of inferences of the character of your opponent, even never having played with the guy before, just by virtue of the fact that he's already come in for a raise. Now, the reason why I go through all this, let's just say that instead of considering someone aggressive, someone that opens 40% from the button, what if it was 50%? Right? I mean, you can see that if he's even that aggressive, the fact that he's raising twice in a row means about 60% chance he's aggressive. Okay? Now, the reason why I go through all this is not so much to impose the requirement that you do this math on your own, but to show you that observing even one hand of a player is relevant. Okay? I know what a lot of people like to do. Okay? They go there and they sit and they sit and they sit and they watch for orbit after orbit after orbit after orbit and try to get a read on players. Okay? Try to get a handle on what type of player that person is. And I know what you do. Okay, folds him on the button. He raises once. Okay, maybe he's got a hand. You know, next time it gets folded on the cutoff. He raises him. Maybe he's got a hand. I'm not sure. Let's just file that information. And 4 or 5 hours later, you start to act on it. Okay? You can start building information on people with the very first hands. Okay? I think it's a mistake to not do that. Now, you can't be 100% determinative. Like in the similarly as the let's make a deal problem, you can't be 100% sure that you're going to be right by switching, you know, but that you're going to win the $1 million, but you're certainly going to improve your odds using the information that's been provided for you. Now, and likewise, you know, the situation that I'm posing from a poker perspective is, you know, something that comes up a lot. You get moved to a table. You're at a critical stage in the tournament. You have to do something soon. You know what? You don't have the luxury of being able to sit back for orbit after orbit. You're going to have to make these Bayesian assumptions, okay? You're going to have to make these assumptions of people's play. Now, again, all these things have input flaws and assumption flaws. Like, yeah, maybe you have to be right that there's a 20% chance that you have to be right that 80% of the people are tight and 20% of the people are aggressive. You have to be right that if he is in fact aggressive, he's going to open 50 and call 15 or open 20, call 10 or whatever. But the real point of this is that, and the real point of this whole lecture, as short as it is that every bit of information that is intelligent, in other words, every bit of information that is genuine has to help. Okay? I mean, look, let's look at poker this way in light of recent discoveries. In a game of imperfect information, if you just show up and don't look at your cards and play randomly, you're in the worst shape of all. On the other hand, if you're pot ripper or neo and you could see everybody's hole cards, and you know that those hole cards are actually what the hole cards are, then you have a huge edge. And somewhere in the middle is other information, which again is genuine. Like the fact that a guy raises from the button is not an illusion. He has raised, okay? And that does mean something. And you have to figure out how much that means. But it always means something. So I don't know how much of any of this has helped you, but again, this is the kind of stuff that I think about, and you know what I have to say, it's the kind of thing that a lot of expert players think about. And you know, whether you were just able to get a little bit of that Monty Hall problem out of this, that's good too. I encourage you to do a little work on it yourself. You could Google either Bayes' theorem or Monty Hall problem or anything like it. But I guess the lesson is to always be observant and always be trying to build images of people. Don't wait hours and hours and hours because everything means something. With that, this is Sheets for PokerXFactor.com.